Here's a question for you. If your salespeople don't practice their selling skills, how do they get any better? Yeah, listen, I've heard all the objections. We don't have time. It's uncomfortable. I don't like to be judged by my peers, all of those things. But here's the reality. If your people aren't practicing their skills, then they're practicing on your customers. How's that working out? This is Sales Untraining, a very different kind of sales podcast. 3 out of 4 salespeople are failing. They're falling short of their revenue. Why doesn't sales training work? That's what this sales podcast is about. It's your weekly sales strategy guide designed to rewire your sales brain. Welcome to Sales Untraining. I'm Kelly Riggs. Great to have you alongside. And I certainly hope you will like and subscribe to the podcast, but more importantly, at least for me, from my perspective, share it with someone who wants to be in on this conversation. What in the world is wrong with sales training? Well, it's not the training, I've said this over and over per se, but it's the systemic issues that exist below the training, that we approach it wrong, we implement it wrong, we don't address variables. There's just a lot of things that go into this that you need to think about if you're actually going to get a return on your invested time and money when you're doing training. Actually, training, wrong word. Because you really don't care about training. No, what you care about is learning and implementation and changing behaviors. And if you don't change behaviors, then as the old adage goes, you keep doing what you've always done, expecting different results. You've heard that one, I'm sure, right? So, let's talk about role play. Oh my gosh. Do you want to set the sales group their hair on fire? Just even mention that you might do role play. First and foremost, we probably need to eliminate that word from our vocabulary because it elicits physical response. I was doing an end of the year sales meeting recently and suggested, hey, we might get together and work through some scenarios and maybe do a little bit of role play. Yikes, my bad. Never should have used that word. Sales leader just about fainted. It's like, oh, no, can't do that. You're going to it's going to be awful. Well, that's interesting. Why is that? People have such a negative idea about the idea of role play, but what we're actually trying to do is simply improve our skills. Quit calling it role play. Let's call it skills practice. I'm okay with that. Skills development. It's looking at ways to get better at what we do before we get to a customer, because what's the alternative? Your salespeople are practicing on customers. I mean, let's face it, that's what's happening. We send them out into the field with some nominal sales training, which interpret that as we've told them a whole lot about our products and why we're the best in the world, in the industry, whatever. And they go out and they tell everybody how great we are and how great our products are, and they product dump. They're product pushers. That's not selling. Not even close, but we set it up that way, and I've talked about this in other episodes. So we say, listen, we need to get better at what we do. We need to learn to create dialogue and ask effective questions and make sure that we're hearing what the customer's needs and challenges are and exploring those more deeply and talking about, their stake in this whole process and how it impacts them, and on it goes. Well, how do you do that without practice? You can't just tell someone you need to fill in that blank. You need to ask more questions. I've seen it over and over. You know what happens? You need to ask more questions, or it turns into an interrogation. And that interrogation sounds like this. What are you using now? How long have you had it? Did you buy the warranty? Are you under contract? It's like a machine gun process of questions that lead to yes and no, one-word answers, and do not create dialogue. So we train them by telling them what to do, and they go out and do it completely wrong, and we don't understand why the results aren't changing. You know how to tell exactly when things are changing? When you observe it during practice. Now, listen, nobody's a fan of role play. I'll give you that. In fact, if you go Google role play, sales role play does not work, you'll get all kinds of people that will tell you, that's right, it's awful, it stinks, nobody likes it, it doesn't work. Absolutely, unequivocally not true. You're throwing out the whole baby with the bathwater by your reaction to that one word. You can do it well, and it can be effective, because not only have I done it with multiple companies and as a consultant, trainer, coach, but I've seen a lot of other people do it well. In fact, I read online, one of the articles I read, in 40 years, I've never seen role play be successful in changing people's behaviors. You've got to be kidding. You didn't talk to me or a lot of people that I know, a lot of people that I am absolutely aware that this is a standard practice. But like a lot of things, how you do it matters. I mean, I want to read this to you in just one of the articles that I read. Point, counterpoint. Why role play? Well, it allows people to apply sales techniques to real life simulations, and it helps the information stick. The more we rehearse and practice during role play, the better. Plus, many companies practice role play in a physical way, talking with your hands, pointing at products, picking them up, and movement has been proven to help boost learning. Well, that sounds fantastic. That sounds like a real testimonial for doing role play. But the next sentence, but it's hard to get participation. Really? That's why you're going to skip all of those benefits that you just laid out so well? Yeah, but there's a lot of reasons why someone wouldn't want to do role play. It feels awkward and unnatural. The pressure to perform distracts from the practice itself. It's hard to take seriously. Conversations can easily go off track, and on this goes. Well, that makes absolutely no sense when you're thinking about the benefits that derive from practice. And I've done an episode like this where I've talked about the coach having a conversation with the media about, hey coach, what are you going to practice this week? Practice. Oh, come on, we don't practice. And that's the way most sales leaders feel about it. Practice? What are you talking about? How do you get better? Well, my guys don't like role play. I mean, I tried it once and, people were embarrassed and they didn't want to be judged. And my point is, can you imagine that kind of response in the athletic arena? Hey, coach, I don't like to look at film in front of the other players at my position. It makes me uncomfortable. I mean, I don't like to be judged. It makes me nervous. And really? Well, maybe you should change your mindset instead of changing the way we get better at what we do. Now, again, I want to make sure we understand that when you talk about role play, you've got to talk about doing it effectively. And one of the suggestions was, well, instead of role play, let's just talk about the scenarios. Let's circle up the chairs and let's exchange ideas and talk about the scenario. And yeah, I'm great with that. But then let's do it live. Now, people will say, yeah, but it's embarrassing and all that. But here's what happens. And this is the most common thing that I've seen in 40 years. Under stress in role play, people will revert to what they've always done. Guess what? The same holds true in the workplace when they're making live calls on a customer or a prospect, and you've talked through a scenario and you've agreed on some things you can say, but you haven't practiced it, and you haven't practiced it in live fire under duress, under stress, in front of a customer or a prospect. You'll go back to doing what you've always done. And you're not going to go back and tell your sales manager, yeah, I dropped the ball. I really stunk it up in that last call. I was trying to implement this talk track or this conversation starter, this question, and I got lost and I didn't know what to do. When you're lost and you don't know what to do, you don't say in front of the customer, hey, I'd never do that in front of a real customer. Oh, whoops, I already did. But that's what you hear when you start talking about role play. And again, let's change the terminology to skills practice, skills training, skills development, something like that. What you'll hear is, well, hey, listen, in the middle of one of these sessions, these scenarios, they'll mess up and do something silly, and then they'll stop and say, I would never do that in front of a customer. Yes, you would. I have sat in and observed thousands of sales calls, including the role play scenarios, the practice and live calls. And I've been in them, and I've seen people, go in the ditch, and, you either help them come back out, or they jump off into another track, or something happens, right? And they say, well, I would never do that in front of a customer. Absolutely, you would. Absolutely. Listen, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not is irrelevant. The objective that should come down from you, the sales leader, is we're here to do one thing and one thing only: get better. We're all going to muddle through it. We're all going to struggle. But there are ways to do role play / skills development in ways that are productive and helpful, not only for the individual, but for everyone that's in the room watching as well. And they take an active role and a participatory role in this process, where we're learning not just the person doing the role play, but everyone who is there. Coming up next, that's exactly what we're going to do and what we're going to talk about: how to set up those scenarios, do this the right way, and how to create a culture of skills improvement. Hey, thanks for making Sales Untraining your first listen of the week. And if you find something you like, if you hear something that's interesting, I hope you'll share it with somebody you know. You can find out more about me at bizlockerroom.com, or email me, kelly@bizlockerroom.com. Now back to the show.
A struggling salesperson loves to talk about anything but actual results. They'll tell you how hard they're working, how much the people love them. They'll tell you about all the deals they're supposedly working. They've got every excuse, right? They're really good at selling you on why they're failing. But the thing they don't want to talk about is what actually is on the scorecard.
Welcome back. This is Sales Untraining. Really great to have you along. And again, I want to ask you to like and subscribe the podcast and share it with people that you think will benefit from this conversation about how do we improve our abilities as sellers, and how do we get a much greater return on the invested time and dollars that we put into the quote unquote training process. Well, we're talking about role play. And again, my suggestion, strike that word from your vocabulary, because it elicits such negative responses from people, and call it skills development, and do something different in regards to doing. But how do you set it up the right way? How do you set it up where you can actually get tangible, observable benefits from this process? Listen, the premise is simple. Practice is what enables us to improve skills. You learn basic skills, then you have to practice. Someone observing helps you make changes, helps you improve along the way until behaviors change and you're able to implement new sets of skills, refined skills, improved skills, so that you're better at what you do under live circumstances, under duress, when the stress is high. Because under stress, you're going to default to exactly what you know, what you've been taught. SEALs have been saying that. Navy SEALs have been saying that for many, many years. Under stress, you'll default to the level of your training. Maybe a better word, you'll default to the level of your learning and your practice. But that's what they mean by that. Well, how do you do it the right way? Well, first and foremost, as a sales leader, sales coaching should have a component of scenario role plays as a part of what you do one-on-one. And if you've got new people and you don't want to expose them to other people's judgment, if you will, or what other people think, then a lot of that role play can be one-on-one. Hey, let's walk our way through this. I'm going to be the customer. You make this call on me. And let's walk through the kinds of questions you're going to ask and how you're going to respond to my answers. First rule of thumb, we're always conducting any kind of scenario role play in a way that mimics reality. How do you do that? You actually call on your memory of real calls, real scenarios. I'm going to be this buyer that we know very well, or that I've worked with a lot, or that I have experience with. I'm going to respond in ways that I know they would. I'm going to act out in my responses things that have actually happened. You know what we're not trying to do? Make it difficult. You set them up to fail. Cause them to get frustrated because I want to see, if you can close me or not. I'll never forget, as a very, very young sales guy, before I knew anything about, sell me this pen and all that, when I was very young, I had a sales manager say, hey, I want to give you a scenario and I want you to take the details that I'm going to give you, and I want you to make a call on me as though I'm a buyer. Now, here's who I am. Here's the kind of business that I'm in. And here's what you're selling. It actually was a pen. It was more of a pen and pencil gift set, special pricing, point of purchase display. He gave me a whole scenario of how I was going to come at this. He said, take 4 or 5 minutes, think through how you want to approach this call, and let's just work through it together. Now, I was, I guess, too dumb or too ignorant to know, oops, I need to be really embarrassed and this is terrible and all that. I just looked at it as a challenge, knowing that it was going to be difficult. It was going to put me in a bad spot because I was very young and very, very new to sales. But I'd had a sales job for a couple of years and had some idea about how to present features and advantages and benefits and maybe how to ask a couple of questions. So here I came at it. I thought through the scenario he gave me, looked at what I could exploit and perhaps want some questions I could ask. So we got through it. He responded in a very normal way, asked me questions. What is that for and how does that work? And then he says, well, what's it going to cost? And I told him what the investment was going to be. I'd read a sales book or two by then, right? Oh, sir, it's not a cost. It's an investment. Right? And I could see him sort of smile a little bit like, yeah, okay, good. And then he said, well, I'm going to need to think about it. And he offered up 3, 4, 5 objections. And I kept working through them the best that I could. And finally, I stopped and I said, Tom, I don't know what else to do at this point. And he goes, that's okay. You did very well. You were never going to close me. I go, excuse me? He goes, no, I was never going to let you close me because I wanted to see what level of persistence you would have. Now, imagine if he just set that up in the beginning. I already worked for him and we're working through our own product line and so forth. And he said to me, hey, we're going to go through this and I want you to handle some of the more common objections proactively. And when I give you some new ones, I want you to work through them because what we want to learn is how to get around those persistent objections, stay calm and collected and not lose, our confidence and keep moving through this. That's our objective. Well, then I'm not going to be I'm not going to be upset or angry or insulted by what he's doing. I know exactly what we're trying to do. And that's the second piece of setting up a role play is first to make it realistic, but also to be very clear about what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to demonstrate that we've learned a product thoroughly? So you're more detailing the product than anything at first. Maybe once we know the product, listen, you know the product well. What I want you to do is work on engaging me as the prospect, asking me questions that elicit good information that creates a dialogue. That's what we're going to practice. So let's talk through it. What do you think are some of the questions you might ask? And then I'm going to give you answers, and I want you to be curious about those answers. I want you to continue to, excavate my answers, and let's work our way through this and see what you get from me. And then let's think about how you proceed with the balance of the call. Very clear objectives. Hey, let me be very clear. Most people, their negative responses to role play are based on somebody made me look stupid. I was never going to get anywhere. They were unrealistic in the whole scenario. I totally get that. But let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. If the role play scenario is bad, the buyer doesn't respond as a natural buyer normally would, using actual circumstances in the past as a guide, then I get it. It's really not valuable. What we want to do is set it up in such a way that we can practice what we're trying to accomplish. The objectives are very clear, And we're doing it in a way that doesn't make you feel awkward or embarrassed or any of those kinds of things. That's not because we're doing role play. That's because we've set that role play up quite poorly. Now, as I mentioned, one-on-one is a great place to start and to begin to create that culture with your individual salespeople. Hey, look, this is what we do. We practice, we work on it. I watch what you're doing. Then you can interject a different person into that role play to play the buyer, make sure they're doing it well, and you can be the observer. Then we can migrate into groups. Having led multiple sales teams, role play was always a practice that I used because people get better very quickly. Now, here's another way to use role play in live fire, and that's in trade shows. Man, I love trade shows. You know why? People are coming to you, and you know as well as I do, if you've done trade shows even once, a lot of people that come in the door are not real buyers. They're tire kickers. They want to pick up your tchotchkes and all that jazz. You know, they're just there to get the free chocolate and a pen and that kind of thing, right? So this is a perfect opportunity to practice. And so you can say, hey, let's work on this. And after you're done with that conversation and you go, yeah, that individual wasn't interested. They weren't a real buyer. Agreed. But you got a chance to work on a presentation, ask some good questions. Let's talk about what you did well. Rule number 3, the first thing you always do, there are things that people do well. And my first boss, the one that hired me after that role play, he was a big role play guy. And we would come out of calls, and the first thing he would always say is, man, let's talk about what you did well in there. Okay? There were some really, really positive things that came out of that. And then he would ask me, based on what you saw, what would you do different? What would you change? And then I'll give you some ideas about what I saw. I mean, it was a very positive learning experience. And then when we had regional meetings, we would do these as groups. We were used to it, right? But again, it comes back to exactly the expectations we set for the scenario, the circumstances we create in understanding exactly who the buyer is and what their background and how we're coming at. Is this a first call or a solution presentation? Because we can practice just about anything. When we're all done in a group, and by the way, I want to migrate to the group, and here's why. When one person is doing a role play, everybody can learn from it. And so the first thing I do is go around to everybody else and say, what did he do well? What did you like about her approach? What did you like about her presentation? If you were him, what would you have done differently? Is there anything that you would have done that you would have come at it? Right? Where did you see opportunities to improve or to redirect to get more impact from the presentation? Everyone is required to take notes, right? Because I want everyone to learn from each individual to multiply the effect. And then when we're done, back to the participant in the role play. What did you learn from this? What are your takeaways? And what will you do differently in your next call and in your next role play that's really going to make a difference? Right? So we create expectations of takeaways, changes in the field. And then when I go work with them in the field, I'm going to remind them about the things we talked about and the things that we're going to try to do. And hey, I'm here. And if you get lost or you're struggling, I'll pick up on it and you can think a little bit about what's going on and we can move on. Listen, every interaction, whether it's in role play or with a prospect or a customer, is an opportunity to get better and to learn. That's a whole nother conversation about coaching. But you can coach dramatically inside of that role play scenario. So to review, think about doing it one-on-one first before the group. As you progress, then you can move to that group. But as you do any role play, either one-on-one or in a group, set the expectations for what we're doing, what we're working on. Make sure you set up a very valid, realistic scenario and play your role appropriately. Make it as real world as you possibly can. All right, if they get stuck, that's not an out. Many people will say, okay, stop. That's not what I would do. I say, okay, first rule of thumb in our scenarios, when you get stuck, you take a pause and you figure out what you're going to do because that's what's going to happen in the real world. And when you default to something that we figure out later, we could have gone a different direction, it's going to make a much bigger impact on you when you realize where you fell apart and how we put it back together and make it work effectively. So I have the no pause rule until I say, okay, that's great. Let's talk about it. And I don't draw it out for long periods of time to make people truly uncomfortable to where they're looking at me like, hey, are you ever going to call this one because I'm killing it or I'm dying over here or whatever. That's the idea, right? And when we're done, what went well? What might we consider doing different? Back to the participant. What did you learn? What were your takeaways? And what changes are you going to make in the future? Folks, I'm guaranteeing you, despite what you may read, that role play is a phenomenal tool. It's not the tool, it's the way we set it up, like so much we talk about on sales and training. It's not that the training is bad, it's not that the tool is bad, it's how we use it, how we implement it, how we execute on it. And this is one of those. Hey, do you want your salespeople practicing on customers, or do you want to practice before they get to the customer? This is Sales Untraining. I'll see you next time.
Sales Untraining is a production of Business Locker Room and Pod About It Productions. Music and editing by Doug Branson. To get more Kelly, visit bizlockerroom.com.